Is everybody in B?
We could, let's give it a little more time,
Okay.
maybe another 30 seconds.
Sure.
Okay, I think everyone's in.
Okay, great. Hello and welcome to this first Zoom gathering of Humanities Centers directors and assistant and associate directors. I'm Peggy McCracken. I'm director of the Institute for the Humanities at the University of Michigan. And I'm going to introduce today's session and give you some information about our plans for these gatherings. Please note, we're recording, right? We're recording this session just to make it accessible to some of the people who couldn't be here. We're going to keep it for just a couple weeks. So our intention is not to build a permanent archive, but just to make the session accessible in the short term. Let me also note that we made a mistake and we failed to set up closed captioning in a way that would work in our host service. So we apologize for that. And if anybody needs closed captioning, please just email us and we'll have it set up in the recording for you. This series is sponsored by the National Humanities Alliance and the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes. And our goal for these gatherings, is for these gatherings to be useful to both of those memberships, though of course there's some overlap between them. Rachel Ortega from the University of Washington and I are serving as co-conveners of these events, and you'll hear more from Rachel in just a minute. When we proposed the idea of these gatherings to the NHA and the CHCI, Rachel and I were responding to some conversations we've had with each other and with some of you about how useful it is to know what other centers are doing and also to know how they're doing it. And we've appreciated the practical sessions at NHA and CHCI meetings and at the National Humanities Conference, but we wanted to extend those conversations through the year. So our vision is for informal, practical gatherings. And here's our structure. So each meeting will feature 2 centers. Today, just one because of this introductory part. But in general, each center director or associate or assistant director will give a brief overview of their center, what they do, how they're organized, how they're funded, what advocacy they do for the humanities, both on their campuses and more broadly, if relevant. And we'll ask the presenters to focus on a project. Also, after this general introduction, to focus on a project, a question, or a challenge of their choice, and to do all that within 15 minutes. And then we'll have 15 minutes for discussion, for follow-up questions, for ideas, for suggestions, for further ideas. So that's not much time, 30 minutes, but our hope is that we can open up some offline conversations as well, and potentially some exchanges among center directors. By sharing where we can share further ideas and stuff. We're going to use a Google Doc to help keep track of all that, so that to keep track of what people contribute. And I'll explain how that's going to work in just a second. So we're going to keep these sessions to 1 hour, as I say, 30 minutes devoted to each center, and we'll end promptly on the hour, a little earlier today. But we hope that by scheduling a 1 hour meeting, we'll be able to, more people will be able to participate. I want to specify that our goal is to include both directors and assistant and associate directors as presenters. That is, I don't know if those are the right names for everybody's center, but we hope to have both faculty and non-faculty staff present about their centers. And this is one way that we're trying to be inclusive. We also want to include newly founded centers, as well as well-established centers, small and large centers, well-funded, not so well-funded, centers with a large campus purview, and centers with a more focused mandate. We want everybody, and we think there are things to learn from everybody's experiences. We hope that presenters will bring to the virtual table some real challenges and maybe even some failures as well as successes. We want this to be a place where we can brainstorm and share strategies and ideas for making things work. So I stress again, informal, practical. Rachel and I will coordinate the gatherings. After today's session, you'll all receive a Google form asking for presentation volunteers and the topics you'd like to address. And we'll also ask you to specify topics you'd like to see addressed. And then Rachel and I will schedule striving for diversity in our pairings of centers and presenters. We already have a next session, which is scheduled for March 15th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern US. And at that point, we'll hear from Holly Tucker from Vanderbilt University and Scott Henkel from the University of Wyoming. We're varying the times and days for these gatherings to fit presenter schedules, first of all, but also maybe to make them more available to more people. So for today, again, just one presentation, and we'll have the opportunity for discussion after Rachel's 15-minute presentation. So please use the chat function if you want to speak. And we're going to have a Google Doc. I think the link is coming in the chat for exchanging ideas and examples. Now we're using a Google Doc because it should be easily accessible and it'll be easier to keep than the chat record. And it'll have structured prompts for people who'd like to give focused feedback in one or more of the areas that Rachel will open up today. So please use the Google Doc for comments, links to information or events or examples for models relevant to the discussion. And please give your name and contact information so people can follow up with you if they want to. So again, please use the Google Doc for sharing information. Use the chat for indicating that you want to speak. Just write comment or question and we'll call on you in order when we get to the discussion part. Any questions? Or B, Sarah, Rachel, did I forget anything? Okay, let's go to Rachel. Rachel Arteaga is Assistant Director of the Simpson Center for the Humanities at the University of Washington, where she's worked extensively on initiatives related to public scholarship and doctoral education reform. She's the co-editor with Rosemary Johnson of a volume entitled Public Scholarship in Literary Studies, which is forthcoming this spring from Amherst College Press. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Washington. So, Rachel, to you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Can everybody hear me? Can I get one nod? Yeah, thank you. Great. I just want to thank first Beatrice Gerwitz, Stephen Kidd, and Sarah Geyer, and all the leadership and staff of the CHCI and the NHA, and reiterate that we are so grateful, Peggy and I are so grateful for them making this possible today and for bringing it to your attention through their mailings out to their memberships. We're excited to see all of you. And I'll keep these remarks really brief. I want to have a lot of time for discussion. And you'll see, we hope will be a model for the kind of presentations we'd like to share, which Peggy has already described, and I will now provide an example of. So my remarks today will give an overview of the Simpson Center for the Humanities. I'll talk about some basic ideas and things that we focus on, and I'll talk about a major topic that you'll see reflected already in some structured prompts that are in the Google Doc that we shared, which is how do we pilot new programs? I'll have examples of pilot programs that we're working on currently, but the goal of my remarks will be more to talk about the process that we use to approach building a new program. How do we think about that and how do we launch it? Then I have a question for all of you that I hope will start our discussion, although I'm very interested in your feedback generally also. And that is just that we want to think about how we do that process of building new programs, launching them, and inviting people into them in a way that is inclusive. And I'll go into a little more detail about what I mean by that at the end of my remarks. I also just wanted to say that if you have anything that you'd like to share in the Google Doc outside of that very firm structure that we have provided, please do so. You can just work outside of it. I know all of you are capable of creating a new bullet point or whatever, and we invite that. So to begin, the Simpson Center for the Humanities at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington, is synonymous for so many of you and many, many people outside of this room today with the visionary leadership of our faculty director, Kathleen Woodward. So I will just remark to begin that everything we do is in the context of her leadership and of her vision for what the humanities can be, her commitment to that, and her convictions about the value that the humanities have for all of us, for research, for teaching, and for the public good, very importantly. So the way that we're set up is that we have these two leadership positions, and I'm the assistant director, and then we have a pretty big staff, from what I understand, in the context of humanities centers nationally. So we have 4 staff positions that are permanent. We have a communications manager, a program and events manager, an administrator, and an administrative assistant. We also hire, whenever we possibly can, on an hourly basis, graduate students and undergraduate students in the humanities to help them with their professional development, but also to meet our administrative and event needs. And that's something that's very important to us as a sort of flexible form of funding that we can help with. The funding that we have, I will not go into great detail about in my remarks, but we'll link in the chat or the doc, I'm not sure where, it's okay, we'll find a place for it, to some very clear and public information about our finances. And we'd be happy to talk further about any of the ways that we're funded. But in general, what you should know is that we are funded through a combination of an endowment, private donations, major grant funding, and state funding. The endowment was given to us very generously by the Simpson family, and that sustains everything we do. We also have significant funding from the NEH through specifically a challenge grant, and that supports digital humanities in a very robust way at the Simpson Center. Those are 2 key highlights about our funding. The way that we advocate is very important to us to think about in a lot of different ways. So Peggy indicated too that when we think about advocacy, and this is true for us, we're not only thinking about public advocacy or legislative agendas, we're thinking too about internal institutional work. And so we do work very closely with CHCI, NHA, and our State Humanities Council, which for us is Humanities Washington, and those relationships are very important to us. But we also work internally at the University of Washington. And I will give an example of that, which is that we always, at a very STEM-focused school, want to advocate for the value of the humanities and the meaning or even the definition of what those things are that we may study and pursue, and what the benefit of those things are to our students and to the community beyond the campus. Our university thinks of itself as for Washington and also for the world. We have a big visionary leadership on our campus as well. We want to be a part of that. So we had an opportunity to serve on a committee for the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification, which we then, as a university, all the tri-campus, we have 3 campuses at the UW, we landed that classification. We were very proud of it, and the humanities were represented in that proposal and in the thinking of that committee because we were at the table. So that's the kind of thing that having a robust staff allows us to do, is serve in these other areas where our voices can be heard and where we can represent faculty and graduate students in the humanities in ways that they may not have really the capacity to take on. And that's a good argument for having a kind of administrative strength and presence on the campus, right? Particularly if you have people who are really well-versed in the humanities, are very highly trained in it, like many people on our staff are. We currently have 4 English PhDs, and that does not include Kathy on our staff. So those are the basic overviews. When I try to give a sense of what our priorities are or what we're known for, I often use 3 very quick things. I will say digital humanities, public scholarship, and for the last few years, especially, the reform or reimagining of the humanities PhD. So those are our major areas of focus right now. We do many other things, and we can talk more about all of the things that we do. But now I'll turn from what we do and who we are to a kind of sense of specificity around new programs and being responsive. So the topic that I chose today, it's on my mind because we're in the middle of a few new calls for proposals that we're writing and launching. We're trying to be responsive in a really particularly challenging moment of the pandemic, its closures, the systemic racism that we know about and hear about, experience in our lives. And we want to be really responsive to this moment, right? But how do we do that in the humanities? And how do we do that at a humanities center? Set up to be agile and able to move quickly, but also set up to be very responsive and sincerely responsive to very entrenched perspectives and deep commitments that people have developed over time, right? And so we were working in that space, and I think we work pretty effectively, but I'll have questions for all of you about how we can strengthen that approach. Let me tell a few stories. I have 3 examples of the new things that we're doing at the Simpson Center that I want to share with you. We can get into the details of what they are, but that's less important to me, as I said, than the approach that we take to it. So pilot programs have become extremely important to us during the pandemic, but they were always important to us. And it seems like we spend a lot of our time building new CFPs. And this is one of the most exciting things about working at the Simpson Center, because Kathy and I and our staff will sit together and we'll sit with our executive board. We'll try to generate new ideas of how we can stay at the leading edge of change and what we can invent to support the immediate needs and the far long-term goals of our faculty and graduate students. And sometimes that will take the form of grants, but sometimes it will take the form of how we're going to distribute our own funding resources to people on our campus, right? So the 3 examples are as follows. Thinking about the kinds of funding that we offer to people and kind of support, it basically goes into 2 categories: collaborative project funding and fellowship funding. Just this spring, we are launching something in each of those. And then the 3rd example that I have is a completely new area for us, which is undergraduate engagement. And we'll share in a little article that the NHA wrote up that our program was described in that article in some detail. So those are the 3 things I want to think through. Now, how do we do a new fellowship program? Well, the first thing we have to think about is eligibility. Who is this program for? We spend an enormous amount of time deciding what the parameters are around that. Even collaborative project funding, who can participate in a project, who can get funding to do, for example, a conference, who can lead it, who can participate in other ways, who might not be eligible for that, and what is at stake in that decision? That's a really important question. It's a major ethical question for us. Another thing to consider is just how to be clear about our intentions in funding something. What is it that we are trying to encourage, support, and make possible? So that's fairly theoretical work and really dense. It requires, in my experience, a lot of revision. So a commitment to revising CFPs is, to me, fundamental to this process. Also, an openness to new ideas, to even begin a new CFP, to consider it, and a real willingness to show humility and to course correct when you need to, even publicly, and to change the program. The question of that becomes, when do you change it? Do you change it during the pilot or after? And that depends. I have 5 more minutes. So I'll go into a little more detail. So the first thing to think about is this iterative process of revision and feedback and thinking through the CFPs and then launching them. So we take into consideration feedback from especially our executive board, but also other conversations that we have, other relationships that we have. And when we're thinking through these opportunities, we want that feedback. At the same time, it depends who's around us, what kind of feedback we're going to get, right? And so we don't want things to become entrenched such that we are missing major pieces of information and major insights. And that's what my big question is for all of you, is how do you correct for that? The other question is, how do you launch it effectively and equitably so everyone in your networks and everyone who could be eligible for it will hear about it, maybe be in touch with you if they have questions. And then how do you go about, what's your plan for clarifying? What's your plan for correcting mistakes if you make mistakes? How do you do that? And how do you mostly, on my mind today, how do you get the word out equitably? Then going forward, once you've done a project and you've launched it, how do you assess it? And what are your practices around that? For us, Again, so much goes back to relationships and feedback. We want to hear from people. How did you experience this program? What was your experience of that? And what was valuable about it? What could have been more helpful to you, etc. And then we decide, do we want to carry this forward? I think another thing about pilot programs, and it seems inherent in the name, but because of the way we work in institutions, I don't think it lends itself to this kind of thinking. Just the willingness to drop something, the willingness to do it once, see that it was not as effective as you'd hoped, or just see that the need has evaporated for that particular kind of support and then stop. It doesn't have to persist. That's a moment that you, I think, should give yourself to say, as we're assessing this and we're looking for the good things about it, and we're looking for the success, we also want to look for the weaknesses, either to improve it the next time around or to just end it and have a reason for doing so. So here are the 3 examples. We have these links somewhere, and I would just refer you to them for more details. These will sound really familiar to all of you. These are programs that make a lot of sense, right? First book fellowships. A lot of places have this. I'm open right now to feedback on how you do your first book fellowships or first book workshops, anything that you do for faculty whose tenure decisions hang on the decision around the assessment of monograph, right? This is something we're trying to support right now. We have never really done this before in this way. And the reason we're doing it now is because of the pressures the pandemic is putting on people. We're concerned about a heightened vulnerability of assistant professors. And I know that's something that's probably on many people's minds right now. The details of how we're doing that support will be on the CFP that we will link to, but I will note that we very rarely, if ever, give people money to go away. This is how I describe that. Rather, we give people money to come together, to gather, and to share information. So we'll be gathering the first book fellows once they're selected. This has just been launched. The deadline is March 15th. Once these people are selected, maybe 4 or 5, we'll see what we get in terms of proposals. They'll be brought together this summer into a cohort. They will be expected to meet, essentially be in residence with us. That might be via Zoom, we don't know yet. And they will share their work and they will move each other's work forward. So that's one program. The second one I want to mention is faculty summer reading groups. Again, responsive to the pandemic, completely different category than something we would have thought about in the past, where we might have been trying to ignite more of a research project or collaborative focus that would have resulted really fairly quickly in some kind of outcome. This is not outcome-based at all and has essentially no goal other than bringing people out of the isolation the pandemic has produced and into new communities of thinking where intellectual work is valued and new ideas are circulated and discussed. We're essentially asking people to apply with a brief application. Tell us what you want to read together. What's the topic? Who are you? Who will you be meeting with? Make a plan for when you'll meet this summer so that we know that you will actually have some kind of schedule, an idea of when you'll get together and you're not just staying in isolation, reading by yourselves. Then we will fund that by giving research budgets to all of those people. They could take it as salary, but when people do that, they have a hit against the total amount of funding because they have to have taxes and benefits taken out, right? Those are the 2 brand new categories. And before I complete my remarks by talking very briefly about the new undergraduate engagement category, I will say we made a huge error when we launched, and it was kind of funny because it was recoverable, but obvious. We launched these gorgeous CFPs that we had been revising, that we talked about with the executive board, that we got feedback on, that we were proud of. And then someone wanted to apply. And the deadline was March 15th, and I told them that and reiterated that. And he said, so I assume that I should just email this to you because there's nowhere on your website to submit this. And we had completely forgotten the very important part of setting up a submission portal. Part of that is because it's outside of our regular funding rounds. We weren't thinking about it. And our focus was on the parameters around the CFP. And the other part of it is that right now, and again, this is all pandemic related, we're working in the absence of an administrative assistant. And that's the kind of, at that moment, that would have been a junction where we handed something off to her or him, and that this person would have done this for us. So we built it, we launched the portal, it's fine. But it was very funny. And it was just a reminder that things are really in progress. And As long as you're willing to fix the mistake and move forward, it'll be fine. But those are the kind of vulnerabilities we have when you try to do something new. So the last thing, I will really just end my comments and refer to the NHA write-up of cohort programs that are so important, but we are moving, not aggressively, but we are moving toward undergraduate engagement as something that's very important at the Simpson Center. At least it'll be a part of what we do. And that is because the humanities at the undergraduate level are embattled, as we all know, and we want to participate in supporting the students who we've heard by talking to them are having real trouble justifying studying at the undergraduate level in our majors. So we want to support our departments however we can and support those students however we can. I will just mention the budget for that program was less than $1,000 each year. So when you can think about pilot programs in conjunction with low cost, high impact opportunities for people, this program is now really our centerpiece of undergraduate education during the academic year, aside from our research program for the students in the summer that we also participate in and help support. But this program is really important to us, and it's something that I think any institution could achieve, and it's attainable for any budget, which is really, really helpful. So I just want to reiterate that when we think about pilot programs, we can think about them being attainable at any level of funding. And that is really all I had for you today. But the second prompt in the Google Doc is where I'd love to go for our discussion, and I'll open this up. I haven't been tracking that document, but I'm very interested in how at any point of the process that I described, and this process with which all of you are so familiar, how do you improve, strengthen your approach to making sure that this information about a new opportunity, and maybe it's a competitive opportunity, is given to people equitably, and that they get all like equitable guidance about how to compete for that opportunity and get the funding and be a part of the reading group across all sorts of lines, right? So at the graduate student level, maybe it's first generation students, or at any level, maybe it's people who are differently positioned in terms of identity and race and gender and class. So these are questions that to me don't have really good answers, but they are interesting in that they push us to think about what our strengths are and what weaknesses and blind spots that can cause for us. In our case, a great strength is our relationships, but that also means that increasingly I'm concerned that people who have relationships with us at the center or feel emboldened for whatever reason of their social background or position to build those relationships or to reach out to us, even for the most simple clarifying question by email. If they feel emboldened to do that, they're more likely to get the resources they need to succeed with us, right? And I would like to correct for that as much as I can. So that is the open question that I have for all of you. And if you can help me think through it today, I'd appreciate it. And we can kind of turn to discussion and a bit of a working meeting now. Thank you.
So anybody who wants to speak, please just indicate that in the chat. Or actually right now, you just start talking.
Could I just ask a question? Thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. And I always love getting ideas and also just insights into the common problems that we all face, such as forgetting to put like how to submit an application, which we have done several times as well. But I really love the faculty reading group idea. It's just a really simple way in the midst of the pandemic to start to bring people back together. And I'm wondering at what you capped the research funds at, and are you capping the amount of groups or trying to fund just as many as possible to get as many people as possible, as well as what size of groups? I mean, any insight you could give into actual mechanics of that, I'd love to hear, because I'm already percolating ideas to try to quickly roll that out. So thank you for that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question or series of questions. And those were the things we were concerned about in our revision process. We knew that if the groups were too big, they wouldn't cohere. It was important to us to think about a kind of intimacy of discussion that was being foregrounded there. So to put a limit on it of maybe 6 people, I think that was what we decided. 5 to 6 participants is what we outlined in the CFP. That was very important to us. We wanted to put that in numbers, right? Like, okay, you've got your list of 6, you got to stop. A lot of people would know more people they'd like to invite, but that has to end there for that exact reason that we're concerned that it'd become unwieldy and people wouldn't be able to discuss as much as they could otherwise. Our funding structure for this was really, I mean, we really are just throwing a number at the wall for this one. I will just be honest with you, because we don't have any basis for this. It's not commensurate to other kinds of funding or other kinds of engagement. And people aren't planning anything. They're not involved in a massive kind of fellowship program. It's just really informal, really fast funding to get to people to, I don't know, like essentially honor the time that they're putting into it. And that's very different kind of labor to support through funding. So we also wanted to indicate a difference in the funding between a leadership role in that group and a participant role in that group. Because we know everybody who's ever done anything collaboratively, somebody will lead and they'll spend more time, and other people will arrive at the Zoom call and say, oh, I'm so happy to see everyone. And those roles are both important, but they're different. And so each participant will receive $1,500 in compensation. Group leaders will receive $1,750. So they're slightly distinct there, that they can have a little bit more funding if they choose to name themselves as leader. We think that that will help them also be encouraged to step up and rally people if there's a bit of a fade out of participation, etc. So the funds, and this is just going to look different in different places. We use research budgets all the time. People don't spend their research budgets. It's shocking to me, but they don't always spend them. So if you're going to do a reimbursement basis, that's the best thing for the participant because they'll get the most funding. They'll get all of it, no tax or benefits hit, but it's not completely flexible the way that a direct payment would be. And because we're in the middle of a pandemic and we are aware of the acute situations that many people are in, if they want to take it as salary, okay, you can buy food now. We can't reimburse you for that, but we can give you a payment for doing this work, which we recognize as work. And then you can use it however you want, and it's totally flexible. It'll be slightly less funding. I don't know if I answered all of your questions, but those were the ones that I remembered to answer.
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
We just started a new center at George Mason, and one of the first things that we did was start faculty graduate student, actually open reading groups for everybody. We surveyed faculty on their research interests. We just made basically a survey and found out what people are interested in, and then sort of tried to locate nodes, put up a Google Doc, and like miraculously, like hundreds of people signed up to be in reading groups. And I put a link in the chat, but I think we have 9 or 10 reading groups going right now. We're not paying anybody anything. I mean, we have budget. Like we will give them, probably each group will give them funding to invite one speaker a semester, like on Zoom kind of thing. But I think like what you're saying, like people are starved for sort of contact with one another. And we also just thought this was a great way to build part of the project of our center is to build intellectual community among faculty and graduate students, because our university is a place where people tend to think of campus as a place where they teach and do service and they go home and do research. And so we're trying to flip that whole thing. And so the reading groups are part of that project. But so we're doing it on a shoestring basically, and people are coming and reading anyway. So, so it's, even if you don't have the budget, I think people might actually just be really enthusiastic for this.
Rachel, if I can jump in first, thank you NHA and CHCI so much. This is fabulous, and I'm already just popping with ideas. So thank you, and thank you to Peggy and Rachel. Rachel, you mentioned that in some of your programs, you all are thinking about the audience for the programs, and one of the things that we keep coming up to and don't really address fully is the fact that more and more of our faculty are not tenure track. They're on other tracks. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about who you include in programs and who the programs address. We'd love advice about that.
This is so important. And we're being pushed to by our audiences. So of course we want to be thoughtful, but we're going to be, it will be demanded of us to answer to this. And it has been for years. And it's a question I get all the time, which is eligibility. So, and who is the Simpson Center for and what is it for? We are a research unit. We often do also fund things that relate to teaching, but we are a research unit. And so where we have the vast majority of opportunities will be for research-oriented work and people whose positions at the university are tied directly to their success or failure as researchers, whether or not we like that. And we don't always like that, but that is often where you will see us investing. But what complicates that is exactly as you've described, is that this just doesn't hold true anymore for so many people. We have people in completely different roles. They're off the tenure track. They're doing a lot of instruction, but not exclusively instruction. They're trained in research, they're capable of it, they're producing it. Often they're assessed on it, whether or not that's formalized in their contracts or, you know, really the way that they're hired. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's a silent, it's just an expectation. And so people fulfill it. So how do we support that when it isn't exactly codified and things are changing at the institutional level? We are trying to be more inclusive in this way when we think we can do it and integrate the roles. So what we do not want to see, or at least I guess I can speak for myself, I think it would not be great for institutional culture, even departmental culture, for us to be saying there are some opportunities that are just for our teaching faculty. And I'll go into a description of that. I put it in the chat, versus our tenure track and people who are regarded as research faculty, right? We don't want to keep emphasizing the division. But for example, and this is where you see this now playing out in the eligibility for the reading groups that we just launched, and this was based on executive board feedback. They said exactly what you just said, right? Like what are we doing for that group of people? And it's really important to us. Can we integrate it? So what we hope to see and what I expect from these proposals, they must be led by and consist of tenure track faculty or full-time teaching faculty at all ranks. And then we list out the ranks. This was a recent conversion at the University of Washington of our lecturer ranks to teaching professors. And they're also on a track. Their assessment of their job is tied to teaching excellence versus research excellence. But of course, those things are related. We all know that. Now, we want to see these groups integrated. That's how I feel about this. So I would like to see groups led by any of these people, but also consisting of all of these different people from different roles. The eligibility question that immediately came up into my inbox when we posted this was that there are competitive searches at the University of Washington for part-time, multi-year contracts. And we edited this to say full-time after I received a series of emails about part-time colleagues. Can we include our part-time colleague in this proposal? Is that person eligible? And at this point in the development of the proposal, where we'd received enough feedback to feel confident that it needed to be full-time faculty, but of either of these ladders, we said, no, they're not eligible. But we also said, we will take this feedback to the executive board and describe why it's important and what the rationale might be. Let's say in a composition program where many people's colleagues are part-time instructors. Why can't they be included? It's important, right? So we need to take that back to the executive board and think through that with them, and it'll be a multi-year process. But I do see some integration in some of our categories, particularly for the more open-ended categories that we feel like we can quickly socially integrate across those lines. It's a really good question.
This might be a good question for a longer discussion too, because that is a concern on our campus too. Jessica, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and thank you all for this wonderful opportunity to hear from so many great people at great campus centers. And I know some of you, but not all of you. So I'm particularly intrigued by this question because our board has actually charged us with investigating ways to expand our research funding opportunities to lecturers and including lecturers at all ranks, including part-time. So maybe it's a future conversation, but we're actually having our conversation next week a special board meeting. And I think, you know, our reading groups are going gangbusters, especially our new Anti-Racism in Action reading group, which has, you know, almost 40 people from across 4 different campuses in the region. And grad students are eligible to be in that, part-time faculty, everybody. But I wonder if other folks are feeling as though this is also the time to begin to think about, you know, expanding other research opportunities to people and constituents across the campus that have not been eligible in previous years. I'd love to hear how. I mean, we're trying to figure it out next week, but
I think Mary has something to say.
Yeah, I want to echo everyone else's thanks. I'm in Canada. I'm the academic director of the new humanities hub at the University of British Columbia. So it's very inspiring to hear all your ideas. I wanted to follow up on what we've been discussing. My funding comes at this point entirely from the VP research. And so it almost by definition is for faculty with research agendas and grad students with research agendas. And so I have felt as if it's outside of my mandate to fund people who aren't in that research stream. However, I will say the most enthusiastic people participating in all our programming, coming to our talks, suggesting ideas, saying they're designing conferences, asking for assistance in how to develop knowledge mobilization plans, etc. Almost all of them are contingent in some way. They're postdocs, they're new faculty in a visiting professorship, etc. There's so much buy-in from those people. So I sort of I feel like the research commitment of people across the campus is really high. And if we disregard those people, we're missing out on all kinds of community building possibilities. I didn't mean to silence you all.
well, and I dropped into the chat that I've been doing a kind of a survey. We've collected a Google Doc of all the kinds of suggestions. So I reached out to our adjunct faculty group. I reached out to lots and lots of lecturers at lots of levels, and it's just extraordinary. The kind of research that's going on in what we think of as non-research faculty roles. And so, you know, that's a single issue. I don't want to waylay the conversation, but I do feel as though this is one of the ways that we're working on inclusion and social justice within the academy right now.
We had that exact conversation in our steering committee as to how to fund, and that inclusivity was a major factor in terms of making sure it was open to faculty of all ranks. Anyone that was teaching at the university that was outside of the graduate student corridor was eligible for anything we did. Because of that issue of inclusivity, we have a real problem with that bifurcation in the academy more generally, but especially between departments of, you know, history departments are versus world languages, where we have a lot more itinerant faculty. And so making sure that we had that openness was really important to our group.
Barbara, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to share, we have a whole menu of programs, and we discuss eligibility for each program with our advisory board and make individual decisions. So it can or cannot include lecturers, members of the public, staff. So in recent memory, the one program that failed was actually reading group by staff members. It was really kind of disappointing and sad. They had a great project, a reading group about the declining number of humanities majors. It included advisors and administrators, and they just couldn't find the time to get it off the ground. But I just wanted to share it as another way that we don't think about our programs as the same across the board. then allows us to define eligibility in each case. And because we've had, you know, postdocs, 2-year postdocs, 3-year postdocs, courtesy faculty, we had so many inquiries that were actually very specific. And I had a whole discussion with HR about definitions. Our librarians are also called faculty, they're curators. So the advice I actually got from HR was that you always define your eligibility in the broadest terms possible, but then you always also define it in some negative and very specific term, because everybody always reads themselves into eligibility. And so it's sort of an ongoing process that involves the advisory board, that involves sometimes people who feel they should be eligible but aren't, so that they email me and then I discuss it with them. And so it's more of a living project in terms of what are the aims of individual programs, who might be interested, and sometimes also going back to, I think it was what Rachel said, sometimes differentiating between who's leading the project and who can be a member of a project. And then also, what does our funding allow us? And for example, in our case, the issue is that we would like to give more to the community, but we can't give something to the community without having somebody from the institution be part of it. And that can then be a graduate student, but then the graduate student has to have a letter from the chair in order for the money to flow. So I think we're doing a very specific, each program, what is the mission, the aim, and then how does that pan out in terms of eligibility?
Catherine?
Hi, I'm Kathy Wallerstein. I'm the Associate Director of the UC Davis Humanities Institute. And Barbara, I'm glad you mentioned staff, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot. You know, especially as we're talking about alternative paths with humanities PhDs, something that I've struggled with both personally and that I'm thinking about with our center is how do we address staff who, you know, PhDs who have ongoing research and writing interests and who maybe don't have any kind of structure in their everyday lives because we're staff members now. And how to integrate the kind of intellectual interests of the administration with the rest of our programming. So that's just something that's been on my mind. I'd be very curious to know if other people are thinking about this and have ideas around that. Maybe this is a topic for another session, but I just wanted to put that out there.
A short question. Peggy. It's Rachel, I just wanted to ask, since people have asked about the level of funding that you had for some of your programs, and you offered the undergraduate engagement budget, and you've been talking to us about the reading group budget. I just wondered what the budget was for your first book fellows that you described as your first project, just so we have an overview of what kind of funding you're dealing with on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Let me look this up. So this was an interesting one because it changed recently. I can tell you that too. We even changed in midstream here in the launch the dollar amount because we got good news about our budgets, basically, which has been counterintuitive for me this year, but I don't know if anybody else feels that way. But right, we have a $10,000 funding package for the first book fellows. Each one of them will get $10,000. We started it at $7,500. They can take this, and then we changed it because we just thought we can afford it. Let's do it. It's a moment of precarity for people. We have the money and we should do it. So we changed it. But I would say,
and sorry, you said there are how many first book fellows?
So there will be at least 4. We'll see how many we can fund when we go through that process.
Is there a set of possible uses for that $10,000, or is that what? So what do you say? What do you name as being the parameters of those fellowships?
That is an excellent question. So we have standard language about how to take a research budget and what the appropriate uses of funds would be. And I won't like sort of reiterate that here, but imagine a research budget that it would include books, travel, and those kinds of expenses. We reimburse for that. However, people may not be able to travel right now, just as an example. So we are allowing people to take this funding as salary if they want to. It will drop the level of funding for them because of the benefits situation. But if they want it to be entirely flexible, they can have that option so that the payment that they receive, we'll never see how it's used. If they go through a reimbursement process, they do have to have things approved. But I would say too, I mean, I'm getting interesting questions. So someone wrote me the other day, I'm interested in the first book fellowship. I'm working on my first book. The press I'm working with says, if I have a subvention of $10,000, interestingly aligned exactly with your amount of money you're offering, I could have an open access full text of this book that I'm going to hopefully be working with them on. Can I use this funding for that if I get it? And I was able to say yes. I mean, so people know what they need, and it's more about us finding that out through the process of being as open as possible. And we don't list, for example, if we listed every single thing we could think of, we would have missed that. We wouldn't have put subvention funds on the CFP, but now we know it's on people's minds. And so we can be responsive. Yeah, those are good questions. Mm-hmm.
I have a question about kind of what's your philosophy with things like, you know, significant funding for something like a book fellowship. Do you have like a series of check-ins or kind of like accountability points along the way or anything like that? Or is it just kind of, you know, you get the funding, go, you know, do your thing and, you know, tell us when you have an outcome? Or you get your book published or whatever. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes total sense. Part of the reason I like working at a humanities center is that I don't have to enforce outcomes on people very often, because our work takes a long time. Our work takes a long time. And so a sort of horizon of accountability, it's hard for us to impose that in terms of project completion. And it'd be counterproductive in a lot of ways for us to do that. What we like to hear is, however many years later, a kind of response back. My book is being published, and we receive these wonderful emails from time to time. We're always thrilled about it, you know, that our support could have been instrumental in that book being published or whatever project being completed. But we're far less interested in project completion than we are in the process of giving good feedback and being responsible to one another in a group of peers. And so that is what you're going to see us launching with this first book situation. People should be very near completion of these projects. And so they'll all be in a kind of position to speak to that process they've been through and then how they finish it out. And we may see that it turns into, in a sense, I hate to diminish it, a little bit of a support group for people who are in a particularly acute moment in their careers as faculty, right? So we want them to be accountable to each other. We're not going to audit them for that. But I would hope they better be supportive. They better read each other's work the day that they are going to have someone present on it. And then they need to give good feedback that will be useful. That's how we do accountability. It's really not about anybody answering to us. We know there are fellowships where people are told, like, we want you to go be productive. Here's the funding to do it. And we'll see you in 6 months. And those sound like beautiful opportunities, but it's not what we create at the Simpson Center very frequently. So I hope that answers the question. I know it's a little vague, and we don't have very specific assessment metrics most of the time for exactly those reasons. And that can be also a bit of a weakness too, because we can't quickly answer on metrics all the time that are traditional for other forms of assessment.
Let me move to Nels Pearson, who raised a hand. Yeah.
Yes, hi. Nels Pearson from Fairfield U. And actually my question was basically what Christina just posted in the chat, Rachel. I was wondering if people can take those funds and apply them towards course releases. We have recently added a mid-career research grant where associate professors can apply for the funding, you know, to take off just one of their course preps. And, you know, be surprised how popular that is, even though there's no other funding attached to it at all. And you're talking about this makes me think maybe we could add one for a first book. You know, we could add a first book award. So I'm just wondering if that's part of the, you know, what they can do.
Such a good question. You see us being very active in the summer, and that is because our funding can be really flexible in the summer and it's unrelated to teaching. It allows us to evade this very question, even though I have received that very question about this new opportunity, interestingly. So no, they cannot do that with this funding. The first book funding is not pulled from the same budget, basically. When we cover people's course releases, we have to have state funding for it, and we have a course finite amount of money in that category so that we can fully support graduate students, tuition, et cetera, to fill in that role for a course. So we do have course buyouts. We use them very specifically for our Society of Scholars, full academic year fellowship. That's not a flexible program. That's a very, very long-standing and stable program. But that is how that program works. So we give 2 course releases for each faculty fellow in that group every year. It's the most coveted, most competitive fellowship we have. And that is why, exactly as you said, because it is the top concern of faculty trying to get research done. So we do it when we can, but we have to protect those funds for that program.
I think we might have time for one more comment or question before we have to stop. I said we'd probably end early, but no, we're not really. So. Well, oh, I'm supposed to indicate also. Thank you for coming. Please fill out the Google form that you will receive by email. Also, please come to our next session on March 15th from 3 to 4 when Holly Tucker and Scott Henkel will present. Let me also flag just one more resource for center directors, which is the CHCI's podcast roundup, which collects podcast episodes from member centers and organizations. I think it's in the chat now. And finally, I want to emphasize that the NHA annual meeting is coming up fast, March 8th through 11th. And I think B is putting a link in the chat for that as well. So thank you for coming, and I hope to see you again on March 15th. Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Peggy.
Thank you.